What happens when development design is applied to India's heartlands? In conversation, we have Prachi, head at Leap Designs, here to talk to us about policy and development design so that we can shape India's rural future. You have a multidisciplinary background, anthropology, psychology, and design. How did you come to join Leap, and what does your role as country head entail day to day?
Okay, it's a little bit of a long story, but I think it's helpful to think about my background really being a larger part of my story as well. So I grew up in the army. My dad was a doctor in the army. So I grew up moving around, seeing different parts of India, really living in small towns, and always curious about people and what motivates them, what drives them, and then larger contexts that are around us. And that sounds silly for a young child, but I think that part of my upbringing became really central to me, and it kind of informed my interest in taking on psychology. And as I was pursuing that pathway of asking questions about people's behaviors and motivations, I stumbled upon actually anthropology being this other sister sort of inquiry into larger societal reasons for why people's behaviors are shaped by that way. So honestly, they were kind of, one was looking at the individual and the other was looking at society. And what was fascinating was that in India, and when I was doing this pursuing this pathway, it was very hard to study them together. And so I found myself going to the US, and there when I was studying them together, thinking I would do a PhD, thinking that I would continue to find create places for us to talk about what wasn't working, how could we do something different. I realized that the tool set that these two fields provided is really strong in asking good questions, in understanding the conditions upon which a society is based and what might be driving some of these behaviors. But where I lacked was in thinking about how do we solve for it, and then really positioning us in a more creative space of solutioning. And that's where design sort of came to be. And so that's where my second master's in design took place. And so in that pathway, I'm still based in the US. I have now pivoted from wanting to solve, looking at problems that we are faced with as a society, to really looking at how do we solution for it. And I'm working in that space of social innovation, but there was still something missing because I was still not able to have that conversation back home in my country. And so in that exploration, while working in social innovation in the US, I was working in topics like food insecurity, healthcare, really gnarly systemic problems, what we call as wicked problems, right? Because they are interlinked. There's so many facets to it that need to be figured out. And design is an excellent language to parse through some of this and also make what is invisible visible. Right? It has a really strong capability to do so. But when the opportunity presented itself with Leap, that was based in India, whose mandate was really to think about how design could make an impact in the development space, it truly felt like a full circle moment for me. Someone who had left India to go and pursue the ability to look at these subjects and topics together, who had then honed in a skill set around the space of design, and in trying to solve these problems, to be able to come back here and explore it with folks who are doing amazing work on the ground, like Transform Rural India, who are already been in this space, who've been working and chipping away at it. We really felt like there was a possibility with Leap to really go after more transformative, bold actions and use design to do so. And so that's how I found my way to design. The people who founded it were at the same design school that I had been at. We had a conversation, and I think it was really important that our presence in India was grounded by people who were from here, who had our own stories, who had our own perspectives, and who could bring that education that had been developed abroad, but could figure out what would work in our context, right? It's not we cannot apply those frameworks and concepts en masse here. We really need to think about the context of the people. And that really actually connects back to my psychology and anthropology background, because the master's I did there was called psychological anthropology. And it was all about asking, can these psychological concepts that were made in the US, in the West, which were based not on our populations, could they really answer the problems we were facing? And I think there's a similar question again with design, even though it's far more fungible and more agnostic to the topic. What is it about those frameworks that is useful? What about them is adaptable? And so we're on that journey at Leap. And so my day to day at Leap constantly changes. Our partnership with TRIF really laid the foundation for our work in rural development. As we are now positioned, my role is a lot about figuring out other partner organizations that are purpose driven, that we can bring these methods to, so that we can continue this conversation and agenda of how do we make use design models to make it the better for the well-being of the people and the planet, which is our mission at Leap, trying to find the right partner organizations to do that with. So my day-to-day is about talking to organizations, but also working hand in hand with some to see where there might be opportunities. And then we continue to advance on some really cool projects with TRIF as well.
All right. So, what would you say development design means in the rural Indian context?
It's a good question. I think even with that, development design itself sometimes feels like a jargon term, right? So if you had to take it apart, there is design, which is a field of practice. And, it started at one point just being about somebody making something. And so they would make something and they would use it for themselves. And at one point it became about making something and making it for others. So now you're selling that product. And you have to think about, what does that product need to have? What is its shape? What its affordances? And as a field of design starts developing, it goes from this piece about thinking about products and services that are in provision for others, and also how do we do that right? What do people need? How does that actually be responsive to it? To now really thinking about also what are at the systemic level things that are going on, and how can we use design practices to connect things in a way that, again, the solutions can be for the benefit of many. So in that sort of trajectory of design, the space of development is very interesting, because it is where a lot of really unique, tricky, interconnected, interlinked problems exist. And so do systems that have perpetuated those problems, right? So we can't really solve the inequities in that system using the same methods that created that system. And that's kind of the core piece of the new advanced design models that we're trying to engage with, is trying to see, can we bring in a different framing, a different approach, so that we can shift the conditions upon which some of this has been emerging. And so if that would be what we would codify as development design, which I think we're on a journey to. If you looked up the word development design, you might actually find something very different. It might be about urban design, or it might be about more architecture. But the kind of design we are trying to do is at that systems level. It's about architecting change. It's about creating infrastructures that people can leverage. It's about inviting people in. And where else to do this than in rural India, where these really intractable problems exist, where human behavior and the systems that are perpetuating it are constantly in a battle for keeping the status quo. And so even if we have a lot of investment and solution making through the traditional development pathways of aid and investment, even in, we feel there is an opportunity to try a few more new pathways. And that's really where I think there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of really cool work happening, is using development design in the rural context in ways that we can build upon what is already being done.
Taking this further, you recently helped launch the Million Designers, Billion Dreams program with the government of India's Ministry of Rural Development. So, how does it work to democratize design skills among rural leaders like SHG groups or panchayat representatives? Is there some sort of barrier that you've noticed? How does that happen?
Yeah, so I think this is such an interesting and very impactful project that we did, and it's completely in line with what I was sharing. So it's based on that nugget of how do we embed these capabilities amongst the people themselves who are most front in line trying to solve these problems. So the Million Designers, Billion Dreams initiative is really about equipping frontline workers, so local government administrators who are working on the ground, who are constantly trying to problem solve and are looking at systemic issues and are maybe being given just a part of it that they have control and insight into. We want to give them this language and ability to think about the different parts and bring it together into the whole. And so actually our model that we use is called Whole View. But what it does is it really breaks down a way of organizing the information that's available. So how might we be able to think about what is it that who are we doing this for? How can you think about what is the value that what we are providing? What is the value that people are getting? What are the other stakeholders getting? What might be the incentives that are connected? And then what is it in our offering that needs to respond to that? And then there might be a set of questions about what do we have to do as our competency to be able to do this? One is like, you can just come up with a solution that's based on what you do best, but you might realize that that's not really the answer. So how is it that you want to either partner or do it yourself? So build that competency in-house. And then also overall asking, like, what is it that is my strategy? Like, why am I doing this? What am I trying to solve for in the health space? What is it that I'm going for? So with that model and breaking it down into these like very manageable parts and some frameworks that help you organize the information that you already have in your head and make it visible and make it tangible and make it so that you can have a conversation with a peer. So with that, with the Million Designers, Billion Dreams, we're able to design a curriculum that we're teaching this to frontline workers. And that's the idea of if we teach even 1 million of them, billions of dreams will be realized because they are in line and they are connecting to people and helping solve for other people's problems. And rather than problems, shaping that into being about dreams and about what opportunities do we want to realize in India, right? So equipping them. There was an opportunity here to really think about flourishing localities, collective gain, and how do we have prosperity for many. And so when we're thinking about that, there was a moment to really, again, embed sort of like the pieces of these capabilities for allowing them to sort of work through these elements. So in the colloquy and others, I would say that, and we can talk more about the Prosperous Many project and like different elements of it, but I think that sort of framing of asking ourselves what is prosperity and what's the definition of prosperity and what does it mean to prosper beyond the economic, I think gives us some interesting explorations that link many of these pieces together. And so I think the colloquy is a very interesting place where we're able to explore these perspectives.
So looking ahead, India aspires to be Viksit Bharat 2047. Now, you've referenced Amartya Sen's opinion that development is all about expanding real freedom. In your opinion, what are the most important steps that you must ensure so that the rural communities are just as much as a part of that vision as the urban communities seem to be?
Yeah. I think what's really cool about the way the Viksit Bharat 2047 has been framed is that they have actually identified these different groups to focus on. So they've said that they're going to focus on women, on farmers, on youth. And then they're thinking about these populations, a lot of them are embedded in that rural sector. What's also interesting in the way that it's currently being pursued is we're capturing visions. And if you look up Viksit Bharat 27, if you see what has been asked of different institutions is workshops are being done, brainstorms are being done on what will it take for us to get there? And I think what's fascinating is who's not in the room. And who's not in the room is the rural communities. We're still talking about them. We're not talking with them, right? And so I think where we would really love to see some of that visioning happen is in the ways that we have also worked on ground with communities to do in projects like the Locality Compact, where we feel with the right tools, people can and do want to build a shared vision together. In the rural context, with the Locality Compact work, we had the SHG women, the Panchayat representatives, and the local governing bodies come together in a room. We did this exercise in making them think about the ways that they were interconnected and the stakeholders they were engaged with by giving them a twine. And there's this very impactful image of, one of the officials sitting in the middle with a thread being held by multiple women, and then these conversations being had. And there's a lot of work that they did to sort of sketch and imagine visions for their community, for their lives. And so we know that this can be done. We think that it is imperative that we don't do our brainstorming exercises and things in schools and institutions far removed from the lived realities of the people that we're trying to solve for. That taking the example of the work that we've done with Locality Compact, we should think about more ways that we can actually bring people to not only be part of the conversation, to shape the conversation, to drive the conversation. I think it's 2025. We don't need to be speaking for people, we should be working with them.
So if you could incorporate any one change right now as it is to make this communication more open, more available to the rural communities, what would it be?
I think we're on the journey, right? We are holding colloquies and things like that. I think where I'm excited to see it go is that we can reflect we can actually reflect and visualize what is being done on the ground in ways that, say, folks that are often watching on a computer, like it's in their context, we can visualize things to their language and pieces, but we can also empower people on the ground to see the impact of what their own actions is. And so I think one thing that I would love to see is that dialogue to be something that we don't let get in the way from logistics perspective, right? I think there is enough technology and there's enough ways, and I think there's enough motivated people to really try and have it be a dialogue and to not feel like it's imperative upon one or the other, but instead, just create the conditions like the colloquy and others, and other things that LEAP is also excited to do, where we can sort of be in the same room and build together, and it's not rural and urban being completely separate. And that again goes back to that piece about intersectionality, right? These are very normal ways of segmentation, and instead if we think about aspirations, you'll find there are much more overlaps and common ways that we can bring us together rather than these typical demographic ways that we divide ourselves.
So finally, for young professionals or community leaders inspired by this colloquy, what advice would you give to them or offer them if they want to use or learn more about design and policy to basically transform rural India?
Yeah, so again, your internet and Google are your friends, but I think where it is truly impactful is to maybe find one or two people that you're really inspired by and truly try to just see if you can have a conversation with them. It is in volunteering to do work in spaces that are interesting to you, because once you're there, once you're actually moving, once you're actually in conversation with people, you're more engaged, you're more activated rather than feeling just the dialogue that's happening around you. So finding opportunities to actually engage, attend, and I know that for many, there's a lot of other things that are currently occupying their time, which is completely understandable. But if you're interested in something, I think you will find that other people who are passionate in it and who you are inspired by, they absolutely will make time actually to talk to you and to share, because they love this and they are passionate about it. So I found my way into design and policy also by sort of following my heart in terms of where I felt my passion lay, but then there was no pathway for it. There was only like, if you wanted to be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer, it was very clear, but the rest of it has just been trusting the next step and going for it. So in the design and policy space, what's really cool in India is that I think 10 years ago, there were far fewer design schools, and now there are like 1,000 plus, and that is a huge shift. Even it's such a recent one, but it's a huge, huge shift. And these institutions are framing design in Indian contexts, are exploring what it means. And so, interestingly, we are going to be doing a partnership with Flame University that's based in Pune. And we have an MOU with Mitra, which is another policy organization, a kind of like Niti Yog, but based in Maharashtra, where we are actually going to be talking about design and policy. So these schools are the frontiers, and organizations like ours are at the frontier of creating these spaces and conversations. And so my recommendation would be to look, to do research, and honestly find the people who seem to be doing stuff you're inspired by, and then follow that to see what else you might be interested in.
Thank you so much, Prachi, for being here today. It's been great diving into your work about systemic inclusion, development design, and everything else. And a big thank you to all of you watching this here. Do not miss checking out the Indian Rural Colloquy that's happening from the August 1st to the 8th. Would love to see you there. I'm Sohani Bhatia. Thank you. Namaste.